Hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining me on a Saturday when I know there's so much stuff going on as well. So I'm just going to do a really quick talk on what I do in GCSE Ancient History with the period studies to build Oracy. So I'm going to really quickly go over why Oracy is important, and then talk about what I do in the Persia study, and then a little bit more about what I do in the Rome depth study as well. So something to think about sort of to start off with, and it's what got me started on this kind of Oracy journey, is to what extent did the pandemic impact on our capacity to improve students' talk and the way that students talk? So did they get less time to talk? Did they lose confidence in the way that they speak about ancient history? And actually, because we spent a lot of time shouting into the ether, do we end up speaking more than our students? And is that problematic? In some ways, no, but in some ways, yeah. So that's kind of the start of my journey on Oracy. It's really important to be precise when we talk about Oracy. Sometimes Oracy and rhetoric get conflated. And obviously when people talk about Oracy in the classics, there's a tendency to jump straight to Cicero and rhetorical devices, and we love it. Not a problem. But when we're thinking about Oracy, it's a lot more about a broad, holistic approach to the use of language. So allowing people to talk confidently, appropriately, giving people the capacity to understand how to use spoken language to both draft thoughts and to sort of polish up and formalize thoughts as well. So it's really important that we understand that Oracy is not the same as rhetoric, because I think in classics people get naturally drawn to the idea of rhetoric, and rhetoric has a place in terms of persuading and thinking about your audience when you're writing and when you're speaking, but it's not the same as Oracy. The other reason why it's really important to think about Oracy is about disadvantage. We know that disadvantage existed before the pandemic. We know that the pandemic has increased the impact of socioeconomic disadvantage. And the EEF, who's done quite a lot of research into Oracy, have really thought about what it is that we can do to improve outcomes, what levers do we have, and although everyone benefits from high quality teaching, again, it seems to be those students from low attaining backgrounds or from SEM backgrounds who really benefit from very precise, very structured, very targeted teaching around the use of language. And Alex Quigley, who's done an awful lot of work on literacy, and his books are amazing. He's got several books closing the reading gap, closing the writing gap, closing the vocabulary gap. All very worth reading if you're interested in the use of language. He's a big advocate of structured talk and high quality reading. And I think as a discipline, we're really good at high quality reading, and we spend a lot of time thinking about our sources. But actually, to sort of complement that, talking very much about our the way we talk about sources in the classroom is really, really useful. Talked about this in terms of sort of our general understanding of what we do in our day-to-day talk. So we spend about 80% of the time using just 2,000 words in our spoken daily interactions with each other. And that's our students' daily interactions with each other as well when they're outside the classroom. But we think about that sort of language, and think about the sort of language we meet in our sources. So although the depth studies aren't source papers, you'll still see, expose them to a lot of sources, and there will be sources on the exam. You can see that actually the way that our historical figures talk to each other is not using that 2,000 words limited. They're using words like proposal, territory, material resources, disposal, that kind of thing. So actually the people we're studying aren't using language that's necessarily familiar to our students. So we need to encourage our students to explore this language, understand it, trial it, and be able to make mistakes with it. And I think that's why Oracy is really useful, because if you say something in front of a supportive peer, you can work through half-formed ideas without the sort of fear of having to commit to it in writing. Some of the students that I teach are very scared of the process of drafting, scared of making mistakes, but it seems there's something ephemeral about the spoken word which allows them to be able to put stuff out there, to put ideas out there, and then to engage with each other about the validity of those ideas without sort of having too high stakes in it. VEF again has done a lot of work on promoting literacy, and it suggests that actually really the most important thing is opportunities for structured talk, and it's this in combination with disciplinary literacy and breaking down complex texts, breaking down complex writing tasks, all these kind of different strands that we use in order to facilitate the development of our students. So what do we do about improving the quality of classroom talk? It can be really tempting just to go for like flash in the pan initiatives. So we had no pen day a while ago, or the idea is that everyone has to do the same thing, and that's not really the way that I teach. It's not really the way I want my school to work, and the evidence suggests that it doesn't really work. So it's not about doing lots of different Oracy activities, or though I'm going to give suggestions of several different Oracy activities. It's more about thinking about what's the right activity to do at this point in the course for your students. So it's about creating varied options for talk, but also giving people the structure and the scaffolding they need to be able to talk articulately about the historical events and the historical figures that we are discussing. And Bhavini Taylor wrote a really interesting article about rhetoric and oracy in the Class 6 classroom. And she makes the point that actually our subject discipline is set up to really encourage deconstruction. Like, I think we're the best at deconstructing texts. English might and history might argue with us on that. But, you know, we deconstruct texts, we deconstruct material artifacts, whatever, we can analyze stuff to death. But actually, what we don't make time for, or we find it hard to make time for, is creation of our own communication, so the construction of our own texts. And you think that actually, having spent so long in Latin studying how Cicero creates a persuasive argument and that kind of thing, would mean we'd be better at it, but students really struggle with the transfer of that skill. A little bit about my context, because I know that there's a wide variety of different people here. I am blessed to have a 3-year curriculum, which means I do have more time to do stuff about Oracy, and I know that some of you guys will be teaching under insane time pressure, and I have the utmost respect for you that managed to pull off this course in 2 years, because I don't know how you can do it. But we also within that have certain things that we try really hard to get into our year 9 curriculum. So our students do the HBQ qualification, which is a bit like the EPQ, but shorter. And that has presentations at the end of the year. So one of the reasons we built Oracy so much into the Persia unit is to try and build their confidence in presenting so that they can do that presentation. We also have some design technology elements, because no one does design technology in year 9. So it feels like I've got lots of time and space to do lots of fun stuff. And I do, and I'm very privileged, but I'm not saying that everyone has the time and space to do these things. And the other thing about Oracy is my context. So I'm very fortunate. I studied Latin up to GCSE at my school, but then my school didn't run GCSE A-level Latin, so I had to study it separately. I spent a lot of time in sixth form going to the British Museum and just wandering around these amazing places, but not really understanding what I was seeing and not really being able to access how to talk about this, or how to sort of analyze or see what I'm seeing. So for me, there was a little bit of the mysticism of classics which attracted me to it. I'm not sure that's what we're after. I think there is a lot to be explored and a lot of amazing stuff, but obviously we have to be careful about orientalizing or fantasizing different cultures within classics. But I'm used to not knowing how to say stuff. I sort of grew up with that, and I think that kind of helps me because I empathize an awful lot with those students that are really struggling, even to know how to do the syllable division of a name like Socrates. You know, to us it feels natural. It feels like knowledge you can't unknow. To them, it feels like it's a whole new world. So yeah, it is about feeling the theory and doing it anyway. So for the Persia unit, one resource that I really love to use is the Audible version of Lloyd Llewellyn-Jones's Persians book. The first bit, from about 5 minutes into 10 minutes on, is all about the history of Persia. So I normally put that on in the classroom, and then I show people around the map so that they can see the development of the Persian Empire, but also they can see the development of the language. So they can see that actually the history that we have and the names that we have are already filtered through the Greeks and through the Romans. And therefore, we might not pronounce Darius's name correctly, or we might, they might stumble over Achaemenes' name. And when they get to Ujaresnet, it's basically throw some consonants and some vowels together and see what you can get. But this is a problem that the Romans and the Greeks have also struggled with, and that actually it's okay to make mistakes on it. People will understand that you might struggle to pronounce these places. That shouldn't stop you talking about it. And I think there is getting over that fear of talking about different areas of the Mediterranean is really important. And we want to sort of normalize that really early on in our course, because otherwise some people won't talk, and it's not because they don't know. It's literally just that fear of being wrong. And I work really hard in my classroom to make sure that everyone knows that they can be wrong. So what we do at the start is we have an introduction to ancient Mediterranean module. I do Judea as an example presentation because obviously geopolitically it's quite sensitive, so I need to make sure that that's done well. It's also the only place that really has a continuing culture. I mean, you've got Egypt and you've got sort of Greek culture, but the idea is that I do the history of Judea in this time as a really quick presentation. They've got certain criteria they need to fit, and then I put them in groups and they have to prepare and create a presentation on these places. All these places are going to come up either, well, all of these places come up in the Persia module. We could also do it for the Rome module as well, if you want to start with the Rome module. So this is an example slide from it. So this is one of my groups that did Assyria. And they did really nice presentation. We talk a lot about making it readable. There's too much text on there, but that's probably, a classic error they make. But also helping them and sort of pre-teaching them how to say some of the names here, so that they feel confident standing up in front of the class and talking about these places. Once we move on to the course proper, I do debate on Cambyses because the sources on Cambyses are amazing. If you don't know the Persia course very well, basically, according to Herodotus, he's the worst human being who's ever lived ever, until you get to Xerxes. And according to the sort of non-Greek sources, he's actually all right, and no one really knows what Herodotus is complaining about. So this is sort of the same. It's very sort of they're very diametrically opposed. The sources don't really talk to each other. You could do exactly the same style of debate using the material evidence for the existence of the early kings of Rome versus the literary evidence for that. But that's a harder debate. If I was doing this at A level, that's the sort of debate that I do at A level. When you do debate, it's really important to structure it. Really important to give people opportunity to work individually. So that's why we do some individual research and planning before they all come together. And it's really important that you give people a chance to have a role. So someone who isn't confident public speaking, but actually done a lot of research, getting them just to be the timekeeper. They've already contributed, they've always been through the material, finding another way to get them to talk about it, not in front of everyone, can be a really, really good thing to do. And then we also get people to give feedback. We're really big on compassionate feedback and character development as well. So giving people a chance to evaluate their own participation, evaluate other people's participation in the activity. I was trying to work out how I'm going to describe the next activity. This is an activity Bob Lister taught me on my PGCE 16 years ago. He taught it me for Koroi, but it works really well for sort of any material sources that are a bit unfamiliar. What you do is you have half the class looking at the source, and they are the describers, and they are all paired up with the other half of the class who are facing away from the source, and they are drawing it. So the person who is describing it describes it to the person who is drawing it. And then at the end, after about 10 minutes, the person who's drawing it gets to see the original source and see how much they've done it. So it's a really good way of challenging people to look in more depth at the sources. So often people see the statue of Ujaresnet and go, oh, a statue, he's lost his head. People don't often notice a missing foot, but then they start drawing it and they do. What's that suggest about the history of this statue? They see that there is something inscribed, but they then need to come up closer to see that it's actually inscribed in hieroglyphics. So then they need to work out, is this significant in terms of the ethnicity of this person? Then you see what they're holding. what's the person holding? Oh, he seems to be holding the crook and flail. What's the symbolizing of that? And so it really helps to get them to talk about our sources, and also to look hard at it. So we do it with the statue of Ojurasne, and we also do it the Byzantine inscription as well. And the Byzantine inscription is great because obviously you've got the guy with the beard and the hat at the end, and he's the one that everyone ends up drawing. You might get Darius if you're lucky. You'll get some people. If you're lucky, you get Ahura Mazda floating up. Very rarely did they remember to put the actual inscription in. So it's a really, really nice activity to do. Also, you know, this isn't Oracy, but if you want to do it as a revision activity, I often just have a starter, draw it from memory a couple of weeks later and see how much they can remember, which is really revealing kind of opportunity. One thing you can do for as a revision is a Harkness discussion, which I don't really have a lot of time to talk about now, but I'm just going to throw that out there. It's sort of circular activity run by students. I often, if I can get the timetable to work, get my year 12s or year 13s to model it to my GCSE class. So they come in and they have a discussion. It doesn't have to be on the same topic, just has to be something accessible, so that the GCSE class know what to look for. This only really works for small classes. You need to split it into two different discussions. So if you've got a PGCE student in department, it can be really useful to have them as sort of an extra person to help run it. Really, as a teacher, you're there to observe them. So everyone needs to contribute, everyone needs to ask a question, and seeing how people discuss something. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Persepolis Revisited. It's an amazing resource. So one thing I did during remote learning was I think it was remote learning, it might not have been. I got them to do a recorded voiceover of the guided tour. So you can go wherever you want basically on it. And you can then ask students to sort of describe, do an audio-visual description. And we've got a student who is visually impaired. So actually this is really useful when we say, look, creating a resource for another student to help them understand you've got this brilliant visual resource. He can't access it. What can you do in order to help him be able to access it? And actually as a revision tool, because I really struggle talking about the palaces, I find it really, really great. And they know an awful lot more about not only the sort of building culture, but also just the general sort of achievements of Darius. Moving on to Rome. Obviously love a bit of Chinese whispers to work out why stuff gets distorted. So I struggle with the Rome unit because it's not actual history. So I really like the separating myth from reality part of it, because I get to talk a lot about why it's not proper history. But for them, it's difficult because they need to know the stories as well. So one thing we emphasize during this is the idea of taking on the mantle of the expert. So students will get points for including key phrases or key information in response to a question. So they have to include things like foundation myths or literary tradition or archaeological record, or even sort of more advanced vocabulary like etiological explanation of sort of a place name or something like that. And then to consolidate, and that's why it's really important, is they write the response in their books. Sometimes when we do oracy activities, we do it and it's great, but because it is ephemeral, because it is then taken by the storm winds, to quote Homer, you know, they struggle to capture it. And it's not like everything in the book represents their learning, but if they have a chance to write it, they're revisiting it, and it has slightly more permanence in their brain. A revision activity that I'm going to do for the Kings, we're almost at the end of the Kings, is an homage to Horrible History's Chatty Death, where they're doing a post-death interview. And although this is quite silly, I think it really helps because they have to learn the key achievements and key challenges that each king faced. And they often get it confused. The sort of places don't really mean things to them in the same way it means to us. So we talk about Temple of Janus, or a particular like fight against the Veii. It's really hard for them to associate it with a particular king. So by doing this and by taking on the mantle of a king, and my weaker students, I'll probably give them more sort of well-known kings. And then my more able students, I'll give those ones that is a bit trickier to talk about, so that everyone will have a king that they can talk confidently about. One thing I've stolen from drama is a concept of a whoosh. So this is used a lot in Shakespearean teaching. This is where you get everyone in a circle and you go around the circle, and whenever you call out a character or a historical figure's name, they have to come and act and be that person. So for this example, when I read it out, Tarquinius Superbus, so the first person circles Tarquinius Superbus, sent members of his family, that's a couple of the next couple of one, to talk to the Senate, that's everyone, to ask for his property back. And because you're not just using people, you're using objects, the property, the people who are there to be the property, you have to work out what kind of property it would be. Would it be a house? Would it be luggage? Would it be gold cups? All that kind of stuff. Everyone who is underlined stays in the circle. So Brutus gets up, the Senate are all sitting down, and this is about the conspiracy of the patricians against Brutus, and Brutus ordering his sons to be executed. So the idea is that they get to act that out, and then the confiscation of the property by the Senate. As soon as you say whoosh, everyone returns back to their seats, it clears the circle, and then you can start again. So I model it with this bit, and I deliberately picked this bit because it's after the rape of Lucretia, and you don't want to do a whoosh about the rape of Lucretia. And then I get them to write their own wishes. So again, it's about working out what words you're going to write to be read out loud. And I think that's slightly different than them just writing, but making them think about words that are going to be read out loud is actually really useful because it slows them down and it makes them think about the quality of their writing. And then the last thing I do for Rome is I get them to write their own veteran speech. And again, this is almost an English activity. So it's interesting because we get a lot of really good speeches in Livy, but Livy doesn't report us the actual words of the veteran. So the veteran's here to complain about taxation and all of the terrible treatment he's received at the hands of Superbus. And not Superbus, sorry. And the students are challenged to use rhetorical devices and persuasive language in order to fill out the rest of the speech. So we've got the content, we've got what he's complaining about, but not how he complains. And so they do that and they have a lot of fun and it helps to reinforce the content. But actually, the plenary is a really important thing, which is the reflection on speeches, because often we deconstruct speeches and we go, well, that's just rhetoric. We can't possibly know that he said it like that. And we easily dismiss the how, but we accept the what is said. And actually thinking about that is quite problematic for us in terms of the reliability. I know we can't really talk about reliability at GCSE, but the utility of sources. Why do we get to decide what we accept as true and what we jettison as an embellishment by an author? We'll skip those because we don't have a lot of time. So just in terms of revision activities, we like the post-it note game. Who am I? I did this on Alexander. One of the kids picked Alexander. It took him 5 minutes to work out who's Alexander. And also Just a Minute is really good for thematic revision as well. I know that not everyone has this time, so just a little bit in terms of thinking about easy wings, allowing someone to elaborate on their answer, so allowing them more time to think about what they're saying and answering a question in a more extended fashion as a really good start. Thinking about reflecting the quality of your own language in the classroom. This is something I'm very guilty of. I often take the story and I summarize it in everyday language. And that's really good in terms of accessibility, but it's not really good in terms of encouraging them to use academic language to talk about it. So I often have to catch myself and rephrase it. Balancing out your questioning. So we don't want to lose sort of closed factual content questions. They're really great and they're really important, but actually allowing space for people to develop their oracy skills is really important. And also the idea of always pairing up oracy with a reading or a writing activity to really help consolidate the development that they're doing with their spoken language. So does anyone have any questions or any comments about what works for them?
We do have a couple of minutes. If there's anything you'd like to ask, then please do.
Oh, yeah. Quick question. With my context in my current school, we have I keep getting a lot of students with English as an additional language, Is there any good advice in terms of promoting Oracy with there? Because I know they struggle with the English language, and then I'm throwing Greek names, Persian names at them. So
In some ways, though, they're seeing it almost as a strength because they've had to, like, they've had already to adapt to a often a new culture of language in terms of English names. So it's a strength that they already know how to approach a new situation. You know, I'd be at that more positive. I know that you can get access to like slightly more adapted sources. So I have a Persia source book that I use for the Persia thing. It's obviously there aren't any set sources. If I had someone who's really struggling, we have Ukrainian guests in our school, but a lot of them come with really good English, which is really lucky. What I would do is I'd probably go through it and use an AI tool in order to try and reduce the level of language. I think picking translations that we use is really important because I know, you know, when you're in a rush and you're on the internet, probably the free one is the one that was written in 1920 and a bit archaic. So sort of running translations through reading levels is really important and actually going, well, people need to know about 95% of text on a page to be able to successfully comprehend it. And so I think like pre-teaching vocabulary is obviously really important. And there are keywords that everyone will be unfamiliar with. In some ways, the technical terminology isn't necessarily the problem. It's the being able to integrate that into the conversation because they're having to put so much cognitive load in. So I guess if you think about it from a cognitive load perspective, whatever you can do to ease the cognitive load and sort of maybe provide sentence structures, sentence starters, or other things that will help them to really model correct use of the terminology could be really useful. Does that help?
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you.
I would also just flag, I'm not sure what sessions you're signed up to, but Tara Atkinson is doing a session later this afternoon on how she teaches ancient history to a very mixed ability cohort, and something that she really champions are sort of our source booklets. That's how she sort of teaches a whole GCSE ancient history course. So if you have got the time, do drop into that session because I think she's going to be sharing some strategies that are very much pegged at how she engages lower ability learners or EAL students. But if you can't, then obviously I'll be circulating that recording, but you might pick up a few ideas from her too.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, thanks so much, Sarah. I mean, I know I said this to you after the Harrow Day, but I wish I was able to go back and teach that course again because there's some really, really brilliant activities there that I wish I could do and that I think students would just find to be enormous fun. So, well, it's 10:44, well done. That was really, really useful. So if you are staying, I should probably stop recording now.